All right, good morning, everybody. I do have 9 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get this party started this morning. You should all be muted at this time. Here you can see the instructions of the GoToWebinar software. Hopefully you all are at least partially familiar. You can ask a question in the question box of that pop-out menu should be on the right-hand side of your screen. So today is Thursday, March 18th. Some of the national level products were just released this morning, which is part of why I chose today for this presentation. Thank you all for joining us as we talk about the outlook through the next few months as we head through the spring here in South Central Texas. So I am going to start off with a quick review of last winter. Of course, February was incredibly impactful across the state of Texas. Starting in December and January, we were above normal in terms of temperatures across the vast majority of our region, but then of course, the middle of February, incredibly cold. Most locations across our area did finish the winter on the whole with below normal temperatures. You can see here on this map, some areas like the Southern Edwards Plateau, colder than others. And this analysis does have a small error. There was not actually warmer than normal conditions here in Dimmitt County. I looked at the data from Carrizo Springs and they don't support this analysis, but at Del Rio, they were very slightly above normal through the winter, taking everything on the whole. This area here of Lavaca and Fayette counties actually did still finish the winter with above normal temperatures. In terms of precipitation, pretty decent overall rainfall for our western areas and then our northern areas of the hill country, but still well below normal across a good chunk of the southern and southeastern portions of our coverage area, taken on the whole from January 1st through February 28th. And then looking at our 4 climate sites, kind of middle of the road on the whole, of course, in terms of freezing days, the most in either the last 3 or 7 years, depending on the site you look at. But precipitation and temperature, both kind of in the middle of the pack in terms of winters in the historical data record. And here's another graphic I put together, and I really want to focus on that, that cold stretch we had in mid-February. If you look at the number of days above normal throughout the winter, our sites were around 60% of the days out of the 90 days this winter were above normal. But it was so cold there in that February 11th through the 20th time period that it really dragged the overall temperatures through the winter below normal at both Austin, Camp Mabry, and at San Antonio. At Bergstrom, just slightly above normal through the winter, and then Del Rio as well. And of course, it was the snowiest February on record at all of our sites. Multiple snowfall events, both to end December, again on January 10th, and then of course that historic week of winter weather on February 11th through the 18th. Moving on, this graphic is sort of similar to the one I showed on the first slide, but from our own source here in the National Weather Service. You can see over the last 90 days where above normal rainfall has come across our Rio Grande Plains regions, and then just east of the I-35 corridor here in northern portions of our area from the Austin Metro eastward. But if you go back a full half year, 180 days, all of those surpluses are completely wiped out, and the entirety of South Central Texas is sort of in the 25th to 75th percentile in terms of comparisons to normal precipitation. So looking ahead, the climatology across our area, of course, as we head into spring, it is our severe weather season. This is a look at the number of severe weather reports over the 1955 to 2013 period. Hail, of course, is the most common report we get in our region, and then followed by thunderstorm winds. Flash flooding is also a concern, ramping up through the season, but maximizing in the summer. And then in terms of precipitation, at Austin and Del Rio, by the time we get to May, it is the wettest month of the year. San Antonio kind of has a 3-way tie between May, June, and October in terms of average monthly rainfall. And this is, of course, based on the 1981 to 2010 normals. And as many of you know, sometime later this spring, probably in May, the 1991 to 2020 new 30-year normals should be out, and we'll see how those compare. Taking a quick look at some of the short-term outlooks. In the immediate short term, we are expected to experience slightly cooler than normal temperatures today, tomorrow. Then a warming trend will begin this weekend, especially by the early part of next week. We should be back above normal. But then in the 6 to 10 day outlook issued yesterday for the March 23rd to 27th period, probably seeing below normal temperatures starting to creep into our west, and maybe a small chance for some precipitation during that period. And then the 8 to 14 day outlook to end the month of March, it does look like we'll have a brief cooler than normal period. And there's no real good signal right now in terms of precipitation. So right now we're under a near normal outlook for that. This is about 6 days old now, but the week 3 to 4 outlook valid through April 9th. It's pretty clear that on the whole we'll be above normal for this March 27th through April 9th period in terms of temperatures. A little bit of a weaker signal in terms of precipitation, but probably 50 to 55% chance that we see slightly below normal overall precipitation during that period. And looking at the broader scale, we are still in a La Nina. It has been weakening. We were in a moderate La Nina. It's now sort of moved into a weak La Nina. And forecasters do believe that by the late spring, we'll likely be transitioning to ENSO neutral for the middle of the year here. But a 60% chance for these La Nina conditions to continue over the next couple of months, and then likely returning to ENSO neutral. This, in terms of the sea surface temperature anomalies across the Pacific, this has been maybe a little bit of an unusual La Nina. Usually these cold anomalies, these darker blue colors, would be really focused here closer to the coast of South America. And of course, you can see now there's some areas of warming trends in the sea surface temperatures in that region. Here's a quick look at what typically happens during a spring after a La Nina winter. For March, April, and May, broken down by climate zones, temperatures are, there's a high risk of warm extremes through the spring, especially just to our north, but over the entirety of South Central Texas. And we can likely expect to see these conditions over the course of the next few months, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. I took the time to break down at our 3 long-term climate cities what the average temperatures looked like in springs after a La Nina event. And so there were 15 springs in the historical record to look at going back to 1950. And for the most part, 2/3 or more of those were well above normal in terms of temperatures, and then taken on average, at all 3 sites, at least a degree departure from normal from what an average year would look like over the entire historical record during that time. And of course, everybody remembers 2011. It was the record warmest for Austin and San Antonio in the March, April, and May period. And at San Antonio, 2006 actually holds the record over 2011, but that was also a weak La Nina winter transitioning out to ENSO neutral. So this gives us a good idea of the chances of seeing an above normal winter in terms of temperatures across our region. Not every year is, but most likely it will be. This is just one model looking at the outlook of temperatures, and it suggests on average 1 to 2 degrees Celsius temperature anomaly from April to June. But this data is supported by multi-model ensembles as well. Above normal temperatures across most of the continental U.S., but especially true over northern parts of Texas, where it may be, significantly warmer than normal through this spring. This product, the North American Multimodal Ensemble, also produces some calibrated probabilities similar to the CPC outlooks, which I'll get to at the end of this presentation. But those also suggest a 60 to 70% chance for the April, May, and June period of above normal temperatures. So, with all of this information, it does appear likely that on the whole, a warmer than average spring. But of course, as we saw just this past February, just one extremely anomalous event can impact those averages. I'd like to talk a little bit about severe weather as well. Research suggests that La Nina conditions in the spring do typically correlate to a higher frequency of severe weather. And that signal maximizes, especially for hail hazards to our north, especially across northeast Texas, eastern Oklahoma, western Arkansas. But there is a signal especially over northern portions of our area, for perhaps an increased risk of hail events. A slightly weaker signal for tornadoes, but again, could be arguably more frequent across our far northern counties in a La Nina year compared to average. If we're looking at some local data, from past storm reports, with the caveat that for some of this, there is a relatively low sample size. You can see for hail and overall severe events, which are largely impacted by the high frequency of hail that we have, we do typically see an increase in La Nina years in this, like this one. For tornadoes, the signal isn't quite as strong. However, this graphic was made in 2014, and since then we have 5 more years of data to work with. And unfortunately, those are skewed by what was an incredibly active, an incredibly active spring in 2015, in which there were 19 tornadoes recorded across our area. That was a weak El Nino year. But there were also 1 in 2016 and 3 in 2017. And so taken on the whole, averaging out over the last 5 years, there were 8 per year during the El Nino years, 4 during La Nina, and 4.5 neutral, which would really bring this graph more towards an equal weight in terms of tornadoes. So not a super strong signal, but just something to be aware of and think of as we head through our active season for severe weather. Now, looking at precipitation, not quite as strong of a signal in terms of extremes when you're talking about the correlation with the ENSO cycle. In our western areas, maybe a slightly higher chance of seeing dry extremes, and not really any clear signal over our eastern areas. And some people might be thinking, why the higher risk for severe weather, but a lower risk for above normal rainfall? It may seem counterintuitive, but it's actually not so much. A less stagnant storm track in La Nina years, things are a little bit more progressive. We see fewer heavy rainfall events on average, and more setups that would favor supercells that could produce large hail and tornadoes. Similar to what's been happening in the area that I showed here. Over the course of the last few weeks, there's been a couple of severe events, in areas to our east and northeast. A similar analysis looking back over our local area at the last 15 springs with La Nina conditions. Not as strong of a signal as with temperature. You can see here, especially at Austin, there have been some years that have had extremely high rainfall amounts, especially here in 1975 and 1976. But of course, on the opposite end of the spectrum, there's years like 2011 where San Antonio had under an inch of rainfall in that 3-month period, or 1956 at Del Rio, less than 1/10 of an inch of rain. So, there is a chance to see those dry extremes in La Nina years. And on average, slightly below normal at Austin, that's heavily impacted by, that average is sort of skewed by these heavy rainfall years. But that signal is incredibly strong at Del Rio. Del Rio is very, very likely to see drier than normal conditions through the course of this spring. Then looking again at the CFS model, this time what I did is I used the version that has a skill mask. So what this is saying is the model may not be super confident over northern portions of our area, but it does predict a high, a low anomaly in terms of daily average precipitation. And that anomaly is the highest over our coastal plains counties in this particular model. But again, if we take a look at sort of a conglomerate of a number of models, we can see that signal continue for lower than average precipitation on average across our area. So these calibrated probabilities on the order of 36 to 50%. And we'll see soon that the just released outlook from the Climate Prediction Center follows this prediction relatively closely. And then lastly, this is courtesy of the Western Region Climate Center, talking about the risk of extremes of precipitation. So starting with this first map in the top left, this is looking at a risk of extreme rainfall events for wet extremes. So generally a near normal chance for an event that would bring excessive rainfall to our area. A much stronger signal, however, in terms of dry extremes. Most of our area has a relatively large patch here of a high risk rate of dry extremes, so a lack of rainfall across our area during La Nina springs. But taking all this up and adding it together, the just released drought outlook does expect to continue to see expansion and deterioration of drought status across our area throughout the course of the next few months. And this morning's drought monitor has already begun to re-expand some of these drought areas compared to just a few weeks ago when we had seen some improvement thanks to the very wet weather we experienced in February. But as of right now, 20% of our area is under an abnormally dry monitor outlook here, 42% under moderate drought, and 33% now under severe drought. And that's expanded somewhat significantly here, again, over the last couple of weeks. So again, here's the Climate Prediction Center outlook that was just released this morning. It does show a strong signal for above normal temperatures here across the majority of Texas, 60 to 70% chance that on average in the April through June period that we will see above normal temperatures. And then below normal precipitation is probable as well, with 40 to 50% chance across the majority of central Texas here. And then lastly, I want to move on and talk a little bit about fire weather. Of course, just yesterday we had a red flag day across a good chunk of our area. Despite the modest winter precipitation, our soil moistures do remain anomalously low across the region, especially west. And of course, the D1 and D2 drought does persist as a result. So the fire weather outlook issued by the National Interagency Fire Center does predict near normal significant wildland fire potential in the April and May period for our eastern areas, but for our western area, like half to 2/3, likely above normal fire risk as we head through the spring. And these were just updated this morning as well, showing the energy release component across 2 of the 4 regions that cover our area. And of course, yesterday's event really jumped up the ERC values here across South Texas. We may see these continue if the warmer and drier than normal conditions are able to persist across our area for an extended period of time. As we see those dry fronts, just like we saw yesterday morning, with the strong winds behind them and very low relative humidities, there will be a continued risk of above normal fire potential across our area as we head through the spring. Just to wrap up and summarize everything that I've just gone through, we are expecting above normal temperatures to persist. The risk of heavy rain and flash flooding is near to slightly below normal. Again, all it takes is one high impact event to cause problems. So, we can never let our guard down, but on the whole, we aren't expecting there to be a high risk of flooding being an issue through the spring. However, there is a slightly increased risk of impacts from severe weather, with that signal strongest over northern portions of our area. And then the main impact through the spring will likely be fire weather, with above normal impacts expected from wildland fires due to the below normal rainfall, as well as the near to slightly warmer than normal temperatures that we're expected to see through the spring. And so with that, I'll leave up this final slide with my contact information and our website. Of course, you can reach us at our office via this number as well. And with that, we'll see if there are any questions that have come in through the course of this talk.
Hey, Keith, so the one question, I answered it as a yes, but maybe you want to expand on it. The first one was basically, does ENSO neutral mean in between La Nina, El Nino? I don't know if you wanted to expand at least what that definition of, ENSO
Sure.
neutral.
So let me go back to, where are we here? Here we go. Okay, so taking a look at specifically this part of this graph right here. ENSO is defined by the sea surface temperature anomaly averaged over a region in the central and eastern Pacific. And a La Nina is by definition when that average is less than negative 0.5 degrees Celsius. And then, of course, as you get colder and colder with those sea surface temperatures, you move into a moderate or a strong El Nino at negative 1 degree Celsius and then negative 1.5 respectively. And then between negative 0.5 and 0.5 is what's considered ENSO neutral. So yes, between a La Nina and an El Nino. And during the summer months, that's very typical. Even after us, many of the stronger El Nino and La Nina events, it is very typical for these sea surface temperatures to return more towards normal. The signal is really maximized through the late fall and the winter months in most years. And there have been some instances in which there have been multi-year La Ninas and multi-year El Ninos, but this doesn't look like it's going to be one of them, at least not through the summer months. Now, of course, the latest forecast does indicate that there is a chance that we could return to La Nina for next fall and winter, but the confidence in these forecasts at that lead time is relatively low. And so, of course, they'll continue to be monitoring that throughout the summer and fall as we look at what we could expect in the longer term.
Hey, great. If you could go back to the very last slide, we have Fred Hayes was trying to get a screen capture of the very last slide, so you could take it back to that slide.
Sure.
There you go. That
one
one
second
there.
here.
Yeah. And then while that is up and people are doing a screen capture, there's a question of can you explain what ENSO is? What's the abbreviation? What does ENSO stand for?
Sure, that's a great question. I could have been more clear about that. ENSO is the El Nino Southern Oscillation. So it's just a term for that entire climate system of sea surface temperatures in the Pacific, especially the central and eastern Pacific. It's one very large, but not the only driver of longer term climates across the planet. For example, El Ninos, because of the nature of the much warmer than normal conditions in the Pacific, for example, a strong El Nino year, when superimposed upon our warming trend, over time due to anthropogenic global warming, usually El Nino years do end up being globally the warmest years in the record. Whereas with La Nina, those colder sea surface temperatures in the Pacific can sort of, draw that variability downward slightly, but still superimposed on that trend. Our past few La Nina winters have still been in the top 10 to 15, warmest globally. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Another question is this is from James. Why does it seem that we are in more than a moderate drought in central and south Burnett County, regardless of what the drought monitor shows? Stock tanks and well levels seem close to the 2010-2011 kind of level. So I guess more or less the question is, what goes into when we go into the drought monitor status? Is it what do you know what kind of things they look at? Is it the wells and the stock tanks, as well as rainfall, as well as ground moisture, as well as lake level? How much stuff goes into that?
It's all of that. And one thing to note as well is that because these are done over the entire United States and are done with respect to both short and long-term impacts, which can be very variable, depending on local conditions. The people who are drawing these maps are doing so with as much local input as they can get. In fact, someone from our office is very frequently on a weekly call with the state climatologist and others across the state to sort of look at the different conditions across the region and try to take all of the available information and put the best possible product out there that takes all of that into account. So for instance, while southern Burnett County, for instance, may be experiencing conditions that may be a little bit worse than the outlook suggests, if you think back to September, just to the north in Lampasas County, they had a really significant rainfall event, and the impacts of that have sort of held somewhat over time. And so there's only so much you can do geographically to delineate those differences. And so sometimes there will be, hyperlocal impacts that are somewhat different from what the drought monitor suggests.
A couple of other folks are asking about will the slides be shared, and I basically just answered back yes, correct. We'll send these out to the whole partner group as well as probably recording, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, so that'll be good. Let's see, what else? Oh, do you know when the 91 to 2020 normals will be released?
I don't have an exact date. Right now, what I have been told, at least I haven't heard anything recently, but last month we were told that locally we would have access to review them sometime in April with a planned release date sometime in May. I have not heard anything more specific than that, but I would expect that they should be released sometime in May.
Gotcha. How do we get these types of updates for North Texas and the Panhandle? Yeah, we have more work.
This is a question I've had before. And it really comes down to what types of things the local offices, at least in the Weather Service, are doing. Some offices have pretty robust websites, especially in the plains, that cover their local drought. I'm not familiar with whether or not any other offices are doing these sorts of live webinar outlooks, but I do recommend reaching out to the climate and hydrology people at your local offices and letting them know that these are things that would be very valuable to you, and they may consider providing that service.
No, right, and I can try to do that too, Keith. I can reach out to my counterparts at the other offices, just letting them kind of know how successful these have been. People may not even have been thinking, and just to let all the partners know, there's 13 offices, Weather Service offices, that handle all the counties of Texas. So there's a lot of other opportunities there, especially for some of you folks that go beyond just our county area. As far as your partnership with other parts of the state, that I'll try to get the ball rolling on maybe seeing if some of the other offices kind of chime in on that. Let's see, here's a question for you. You have mentioned several different types of forecasts. None of them seem to measure exactly the same thing. When they do, they don't seem to agree exactly the same. So how do you decide to which forecast to give the most weight? And does this decision change? She's probably referring to the especially those climate models. Well, there's all these different climate models and everything else. It's like, which one should we follow? Or is it kind of how we do regular forecasting, where is it a combination of them and you look for trends, I guess,
Sure, I'll answer that as best I can, but I'll preface it by saying that I'm not a long-range forecasting expert. I frequently look to others for their expertise in these areas. And of course, the Climate Prediction Center is incredibly good at what they do. I know some of the things they look at, in addition to just some of the models and the modeling ensembles that I've shown today, are past analogs, as well as some of the patterns that are associated with other climate indices. I focus on ENSO because it has the El Nino and La Nina oscillation. I focus on that because it does have a relatively strong impact on South Central Texas weather. But there are other global or regional indices, the Arctic Oscillation, the North Pacific Oscillation. There are these other things that can contribute to these long-range forecasts, and the people that do this are very good at what they do at taking the probabilities versus the possibility that something could go slightly different as a result of an impact from some other long or medium range climate indices. And again, I'm sorry that I don't have a better answer to that question, but
I mean, climatology is such a different science. I mean, it's there's actually for all the folks that are listening, Keith and I, we have got meteorology degrees, but there is a whole other degree program now at different universities, climatology. You can get a degree, you can become a climatologist. It's a whole different type of science. And so, yeah, we rely mainly on their expertise, those climatologists, to present a lot of that material, that Keith presented, and some of the maps that he showed and everything. And then it's our job as kind of the local meteorologist to try to make that understandable. And I think Keith did a great job of breaking it down and taking that crazy science and kind of make it into, well, what are we expecting here kind of locally? One other question is, are there any trends over the past few years suggesting that we are seeing more storm damage in the populated areas in South Central Texas area? Kind of like the urban sprawl continues, as more and more people kind of come in. And I'll take that just because it's a little bit more into my realm of what I typically do. But the answer is, it typically takes people to report storm damage. And so we normally see an uptick in not only hail reports, but tornado reports in urban areas, just because, let's go outside the urban areas. Let's go outside the city of San Antonio, Austin, and the I-35 corridor. There's a whole lot of open space. There are a whole lot of farms and huge ranches that we could have each spring multiple tornadoes that touch down in an area that we never hear about because it's on somebody's 5,000 acre ranch. There were a couple of trees, blown down, and we never hear about it. If that same sort of event happens inside the city of Austin, it's probably captured somehow on cell phone video, or someone's yard, has got, a tree on a car or a tree on a roof or something. So just from a natural way that reporting happens, we will probably always see an uptick in reports near or over cities. And that's just because that's where we primarily get all of our reports from, are from people. So it's kind of a natural thing that we typically see. And it's not because cities attract tornadoes or form tornadoes or help form tornadoes. It's just that that's where people are to see them, if that makes any sense. And I think, let me just review the questions and make sure that we didn't forget anybody here. A lot of people love the outlooks. They say, continue to do it. And yeah, please keep doing these. I think that is about it, Keith. So we can stay on for about 1 more minute here, but otherwise, if you're good, then we'll kind of see if there's any final questions.
All right. Well, thanks for jumping in there, Paul, and answering that last question. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I'm glad to hear that you find value in these, and we will continue them, every 3 months going forward.
Yeah, I think typically you usually post this on top of our webpage, correct?
I do, yeah, and I'll be doing that, if not later today, then very soon.
Yeah. So we'll try to mail it out to all the partners. If you got the original invite list or the invite to this webinar and our partner list, we'll send it out that way. But we'll also put it on top of our web page as well, and that way everybody can have the information. So, okay.
All right. Well, thanks again, everybody, and have a good Thursday.